Alright guys, today I'm going to be walking you through the best OBS, Streamlabs, and Nvidia app settings for the best performance and video quality when recording or streaming. But before we get into that, I want to mention our Paragon Trap House Discord server, which you can find in the description of this video. That's going to have our PC help channel, our files and links channel, even PC part picker lists for all different budgets, and a welcoming community for anything PC or gaming related. If there's anything you need, any questions you have from this video, any of our other videos, or you're looking for even more information, the Discord is where you're going to want to go. And then for our services, we do a ton of services. We have services for all computers. There's tweaks, which are just performance enhancing, overclocking, which is overclocking, you're increasing the amount of power to your components. We have streaming and recording services to set up your dual PC stream, single PC stream, recording settings, whatever you're going to need for your streaming setups, and our networking services as well, which are going to help you reduce ping and buffer bloat for when you're playing your games. So now I'm going to get into the OBS Studio is what we're going to start with. And so the first thing I'm going to want to mention for OBS Studio and Streamlabs Desktop is you're going to want to right click the shortcut that you have for it, hit Properties, go to Compatibility, and check the box for Run this program as administrator. You want to do this for both of these because if they're not running as administrator, sometimes they will not pick up the game on the first try. And so it just makes the process smoother if you make sure to run everything as admin. So like I said, we're going to get started with OBS Studio. So when you run it as admin, it's likely going to show up a pop-up and you're just going to want to hit yes on that pop-up. Then your OBS Studio should open as normal. If you are just now installing OBS for the first time, you're likely going to get a setup wizard. You can just hit cancel and all that. You don't need to go through the setup wizard. I'm going to be walking you through that right now. That is just an automated setup procedure, which you can go through and it will do your settings moderately decently, but I'm going to be walking you through the best settings for playing and recording or streaming at the same time. So the first and most important step is your scene layout. So you're going to have your scenes and your sources, and you're going to want to start with a game scene. So the game scene is going to be, where your game is. You can have alerts or your webcam on top of this. But the reason that we're going to have a game scene is because we're going to separate your game and display scenes from each other. That way a display capture never shows up on your game scene. Display capture is going to feel terrible on both OBS and Streamlabs. And so you're going to want to only be playing your game on game capture. If in the past you haven't been able to capture your game using game capture, that should be fixed by running the program as administrator. So make sure that you're using game capture whenever you can. When you add the game capture, as long as OBS is running as administrator, the capture any full screen application should always capture your game. And if it doesn't, you can choose capture specific window and choose the window here. But it almost certainly will work on capture any full screen application. If you're just going to record 60 FPS videos and stream at 60 FPS, recording at above 60 FPS is only for certain conditions, like if you're going to do slow motion and you have more than 60 hertz or 60 FPS on your game. But if you're going to stream, you're not going to want to stream at 120 FPS because streaming at 120 FPS reduces the bitrate by half. So all of your bitrate gets sent to Twitch, but Twitch is only going to accept 60 FPS. So if you're wasting your 6000 bitrate on 120 FPS, you're going to half your bitrate, effectively lowering your quality, but for a smoother gameplay. And it just doesn't look nearly as good quality-wise, and everyone is used to 60 FPS, so just stick with 60 FPS. And if you are recording and or streaming at 60 FPS, you're going to want to check the box for limit capture frame rate. Now, you can, for Twitch, split your audio, and you can either split your audio using a software like Voicemeeter or by doing specific application captures. So you can enable this capture audio checkbox, and then you can go through the audio for all your different applications by checking this box and adding another application audio capture for each of your applications. But for this part of the tutorial, I'm going to leave that unchecked and we're just going to leave it as normal. So then if you want to ever show your display, you're going to want to create a separate scene for display capture. You're going to have to choose your screen. You don't ever want your display capture to be on your game scene. You want these two to be completely separated. If you have your game playing at stretched resolution, you're going to want to right click the game capture and hit transform and hit stretch to screen. That's going to make sure that the game capture, if it's capturing a game that's not at your native resolution, it will stretch the game to the native resolution, or at least your video resolution that OBS is set to. So now that we've got the two scenes and sources out of the way, we can start on our settings. So the important tabs here for this video are going to be the output and video tab. I'm going to start with the output tab because this is the most important. And so for the purposes of this video, you're going to want to change your output mode to advanced on the top. So you're gonna have a couple of settings. The audio encoder, you can practically always leave default unless you know what you're doing. Don't mess with this. Your audio track, same thing. Unless you know what you're doing, no need to mess with it. Twitch VOD track, this is where that capturing specific applications comes in handy, because if you just want to split your music from your VOD so that music plays to your live audience but doesn't save to your VOD to avoid a DMCA, you can use this feature to accomplish that. There are plenty of videos and guides on how to do that, as well as we may upload one at some point, but I'm not going to be going through the removing music from your VOD today. So what we want to start with for streaming is the video encoder. You're going to have a few options here, most likely. You'll either have hardware encoding, which is going to be almost always designated with H.264. This is going to be the setting that you're going to want to select if you are playing single PC. You can use X264, but X264 is software encoding, and that's going to use your CPU, which is going to directly affect your gaming performance. But if you have an Nvidia or an AMD or even an Intel graphics card, you're going to have a video encoder. In this case, I have an Nvidia graphics card, so I have Nvidia NVENC. But then some of you will have an AMD graphics card, and AMD has their AMD H.264 option. Intel has their QuickSync option. In order of quality, I would say Nvidia is the best, AMD second, and Intel is third to that, but they're all pretty good nowadays. So anyways, I'm gonna start with the Nvidia NVENC. If you're streaming to Twitch, then you're going to want your bit rate to be a maximum of 6,000 kilobytes per second for non-partners and 8,000 kilobytes per second or more for partners. I'm going to assume that most of you are not partners if you're watching this video, and in that case, 6,000 bit rate is pretty limiting as far as quality goes. If you set your output resolution to 1080p for streaming to Twitch with 6,000 bit rate, the stream will look very good when you're standing still. But as soon as you start moving around, building quickly, moving your mouse very fast, fast-paced games specifically, they will have a tough time with 6,000 bit rate at 1080p. So usually what I recommend that you do is set the rescale output to Lanxess and then set the resolution to 1600 by 900. That's going to be 900p, allowing you at 6,000 bit rate. So one thing that I'm going to want to mention is your bit rate, you want to be no more than 75% of your upload speed. So you can go to speedtest.net right now and check your upload speed. And as long as that is above 10 megabytes per second, then you're going to be set for doing 6,000 bit rate. That's going to be perfectly fine. Just if your upload speed is 10 megabytes per second, don't do any more than 7,500 kilobytes per second. Now you can look up the limits for all of the different providers or, streaming platforms that you're going to be streaming on. But I will mention that Twitch max for non-partners is 6,000, and the rest of them, Kick, YouTube, and TikTok, you can generally push those to about 10,000 and do 1920 by 1080p and have no issue, so long as your upload speed supports it. But for Twitch, we have to do a maximum of 6,000 for non-partners and then the 900p quality. But if you can go above 6,000 bit rate, you can set this to disabled and not rescale at all. For keyframe interval, on all the current streaming platforms, you're going to want to set this to 2. Preset. Now, preset's going to apply for NVIDIA GPUs, but there are similar settings for the AMD and Intel GPUs as well. In this case, I'm going to set the preset to the slowest. I'm going to give some background to why you can do this, and this is still recommended for performance while playing. These presets, in fact, all of the hardware encoding in general, both on NVIDIA, AMD, and even Intel GPUs, is all a separate processing chip from the chip that you're using for gaming. And so when you are selecting presets here, or any of these settings for the NVIDIA encoder, all of these settings change how the encoder processes the video, but does not change at all how that affects your game. They're controlled by two completely separate parts of your graphics card. And so setting this to slowest versus fastest is not going to improve your gaming performance. It's just going to improve the performance of the encoder, which isn't a concern in this situation. You're not going to be pushing 6 frames at once, and you're not ever going to hit the power limit of your encoder. So I would just set this to the slowest preset, tuning to the highest quality, and multi-pass mode to 2 passes full resolution. These will be settings for the NVIDIA NVENC. If they're not, then you're going to want to update OBS and or Streamlabs and make sure that you're on either this one or sometimes it says parentheses new. And then you should have all these options. If you're on an AMD GPU, then you're going to have separate options, but it applies the same. You can choose all of the options to be the highest quality. And then for the purposes of this video, leave B frames alone. On AMD, it's going to be default to 3. NVIDIA, it's going to be default to 2. No need to touch it, just leave it alone. And then as far as NVIDIA goes, if you're going to be streaming and recording at the same time, I would uncheck both of these. If you're going to be just streaming or just recording, I would have just adaptive quantization. And if this is a second PC and you're not playing video games on, I would turn both of these on. So then you can go ahead and hit apply, and we're done with the streaming section. For the recording section, you have a few options for your recording format. You have MKV, FLV, MP4, MOV. Realistically, you can choose MKV, but then you're gonna have to remux your videos. But if you remux your videos, then let's say that your PC crashes in the middle of a recording. Having it as MKV will allow you to turn that video into an MP4 and the video still be watchable. But if you are using MP4 as your recording format, which would be the easiest to use without having to remux your videos, then if OBS was to crash for any reason, that entire recording is gone. It's going to be a corrupted file and you won't be able to watch it. So for most of you, I would just choose MP4. A fragmented MP4 is fine. MKV you can choose if you are worried about the reliability of your video. If you are unable to re-record what you are currently recording and it is necessary that it is recorded without any issues, then I would suggest that you just use MKV. But in this case, I'm going to be using MP4. For the video encoder, you can set to use stream encoder, but you're going to be limited to the same streaming qualities. So you almost never want to do that. You almost always want to choose either an H.264 or an HEVC or H.265 format. For most of you, I would recommend H.264. And the reason for that is because if you are trying to watch that video and even in some softwares edit that video, HEVC or H.265 will require specific plugins or just not be supported in general for you to either watch or edit. So H.264 is going to be the safest bet for you. You don't need to do any rescale output for the recording at all, and so we can just go straight to the encoder settings. For the encoder settings, you have a few options. You have constant bitrate, constant QP, and variable bitrate. Those are really the only ones you're going to want to touch. Constant bitrate for recording, you generally just want to avoid. There's no reason to have a constant bitrate. That is more for making sure you're at the maximum for things like streaming at 6,000 bitrate. You don't want it to fluctuate between 3,000 and 6,000. You always want it to be the highest quality available. But when you're recording, you can choose an already extremely high bitrate and then use variable bitrate so that it's only high bitrate when it needs to be, and that will save recording file size quite a bit. So constant QP, you can lower this, go higher. You know, this is basically a quality profile. It's just a number that they attach to quality. The lower you go, the better quality. The higher you go, the worse quality. I don't really mess around with that. I usually just choose variable bitrate. And then for NVIDIA GPUs, I'll do 20,000 bitrate. And then max bitrate, I'll do 50,000. If you only have a bitrate option with no max bitrate option, so AMD GPUs, for instance, you can set the bitrate to 25,000, 30,000, even 35,000, and then it'll adjust as necessary, either to go above that or below that. But for NVIDIA, I just do 20,000 with a max of 50,000. The keyframe interval you can leave at 0, which is auto for recordings. And then the preset, all of these settings apply the exact same. Slowest, best quality, high quality tuning, and 2 passes full resolution with the profile of high. You can leave both of these checked if you're only going to be recording on this PC, and this is a single PC. And then if you're going to be streaming and recording, I would turn both of these off. And if you're just going to be streaming, then this section doesn't matter. But if you're only going to be recording, you can leave both of those on. Then we can get to your video tab. So the video tab is very important. You can't skip out on this step. Because we added the rescale output in the streaming tab, you can set both of these to 1920 by 1080p and 60 FPS. And the reason that you want to do that is because now your game will be recorded at 1920 by 1080p, but it will stream at 1600 by 900p. It's slightly more difficult on your encoder to use rescale output as opposed to the output scaled resolution. But because we're using a hardware encoder, that won't affect gaming performance, and you're not going to reach the limits of your hardware encoder using any of these settings, so it's nothing to worry about. And then that covers it as far as OBS for recording settings and streaming settings. So I'm gonna head over to Streamlabs, which is roughly the same thing, just with a different UI so that you guys can see the differences. And then we'll head on over to the Nvidia app. All right, and then for Streamlabs, the setup process is a little bit different. Again, I'm not going to go through the setup process, but this sometimes includes attaching your Twitch account, which will save settings on the cloud. For if you ever were to switch PCs, all your settings, sources, scenes, everything would stay the same. And it will also allow you to have your chat alerts, everything show up in Streamlabs. OBS has the same functionality, but it doesn't save to the cloud. Some people prefer Streamlabs for that ability and for the ability that it already has the chat box, alert box, all of those nice things to have on your stream built into the application so that you don't have to add browser sources and things like that. Now I'm going to start with the scenes again. Everything applies the exact same. You're going to want to use a game scene with a game capture. And then you're going to want to, you can choose the capture audio. You can choose, I don't think that you can limit the capture frame rate, so you can just leave that alone. And then you can do any full screen application, auto, doesn't matter. It's going to function the same. And then once again, you're going to want to do another scene for display with a display capture. And then we can get into the settings. So the settings, again, roughly the same. There's going to be minor differences in UI layout, really. So we have the advanced tab. You want to set your output mode to advanced. In the streaming section, again, we have the Twitch VOD capability with the audio track for the Twitch VOD. We have the encoder. And so in this case, like I was explaining before, there's H.264 and then there's H.264 new. You're going to want to be on the new one if it's an option. Usually for Streamlabs, I like to uncheck the enforce streaming service encoder settings. If you're a partner on Twitch and you're going to set your bitrate to 8,000, that setting is going to limit it at 6,000 anyways. So it's better to just leave this on default. Just uncheck that and then set your bitrate how you want it. So for the bitrate, again, 6,000, keyframe interval of 2, slowest preset, high quality, full resolution. Look ahead and the adaptive quantization, which is psycho-visual tuning in Streamlabs. The rules apply the same. Have none of these checked if you're streaming and recording and playing the game all on the same PC, and just have psycho-visual tuning if you're going to just stream on the PC and that you're playing your game on. And then if you're on a dual PC setup, it's possible you'll be able to click both of these on both, but you might get an encoder is overloaded warning on Streamlabs or OBS if you have both of these checked and are recording and streaming on a second PC. So you can play around with these toggles. It'll affect quality minorly, so it's really nothing to worry about. And then again, B frames we don't need to touch. So then in the recording tab, everything applies the same. You know, you can use your H.264 encoder. So the H.264 new, variable bit rate with, 20,000, 50,000, everything applies the same as the OBS version, preset of slowest, full resolution, and either check these or don't check these depending on what you're trying to do. Then in the video tab, again, your base resolution you want to be your monitor resolution, your output resolution you want to be your monitor resolution, downscale filter won't matter as long as these aren't different, and then your common FPS value of 60. Streamlabs doesn't have the rescale output, at least not consistently. I think that sometimes it shows up, sometimes it doesn't. But if you have the rescale resolution option in Streamlabs, you can do that. Otherwise, I would recommend just using Streamlabs to stream and then set your output resolution to custom, type in 1600 by 900p, and choose the Linksys downscale filter, and then just use this for streaming and use a separate app for recording. And then we can be on to the Nvidia app. So the Nvidia app is going to be for the overlay. We have the Nvidia overlay, and that has Shadowplay. Now, Shadowplay cheats a little bit. And what I mean by that is Shadowplay has some driver advantages over OBS and Streamlabs. And so they kind of prioritize their overlay with their encoder. And so they can send information directly from the GPU driver to the GPU without having to go through the CPU for the processing of the game capture, which allows them to have a significant performance advantage over OBS and Streamlabs. They kind of cheat the driver a little bit and feed the frames of the game directly into the overlay rather than having to capture the game separately, which is what OBS and Streamlabs have to do. And so these settings are going to be for recording and streaming if you would like, but the number one thing that I recommend the Nvidia overlay for is for clips, because usually in clips you don't always want your webcam, sometimes you don't want your mic, and Nvidia clips are just going to be extremely basic. There's not a lot of customization like there is in OBS or Streamlabs. So OBS and Streamlabs I would recommend for streaming because you can add your alert box, chat box, webcam, overlays, all of that. But then when you just want your base clips for editing a YouTube video, for instance, I would use the Nvidia overlay because it's the most performant option and it's just going to be very easy for all of you to set up. The same thing applies for the AMD instant replay. I don't have an AMD GPU, so I can't really go through the AMD settings for you guys. So for the Nvidia settings, you're going to need to go to the Nvidia app. You can download this, and then once you have it, you go to the settings tab and turn on the Nvidia overlay. The default hotkey, as you can see right here, is Alt-Z, and that will open up your overlay on top of your screen. So with that overlay open, you have the record option, you have the instant replay option, you have the highlights option, and you can set whether or not your microphone is always on, off, or it's push to talk. And then you have your gallery, which will contain all of your clips and your recordings. So to actually adjust the settings for this, you're going to want to go to the top right to the cogwheel, click settings, and then you have your shortcuts. So if you need to change your overlay shortcut in case it interferes with a game shortcut, you can do that here. Your push to talk button, your microphone on and off toggle, and a bunch of other, little shortcuts that you can use to adjust your heads up display and whether or not you're gonna turn recording on, save your clip that you have on instant replay, stuff like that. Then we have your heads up display. Your heads up display, you can turn on all types of performance settings and whatnot. I just don't like to have heads up display on at all. So I just avoid that setting, and then we'll get straight into the recording settings. So we have the audio. You're going to want to make sure that your microphone source is set up properly. You can do separate tracks if you want, which will separate your mic and your game and your computer as a whole, which will allow you to mute or lower your mic when you are editing the video in certain editing applications. So that can be a very useful feature for some people, but in some editing applications, it won't support multi-tracks. And if that's the case, then when you select separate tracks, one of the two tracks won't be there. So just watch out for that and pay attention to what editing software you're using. Then for the video capture, there is an option for the desktop capture. So basically allowing Nvidia app to record your desktop. You can turn this on or off. Doesn't affect performance. There's no difference. This is just probably mostly for privacy. And then you can adjust your instant replay length here. So this is currently set to 5 minutes. And then your quality, you can just set it to these presets. It really won't matter. I suggest doing custom, resolution in-game, frame rate 60 FPS, and then your codec H.264 HEVC. You have a few options here, AV1, which is more efficient, but H.264 HEVC is going to be the most supported by editing applications, like I said. But you always can try AV1 if your editing software supports it, and it is going to be a more efficient codec. And then for your bitrate, you can adjust this however you would like. For 1080p, 50 megabytes per second is fine. If you're going to go higher than 1080p, I would raise this. So, 2560 by 1440, I'd probably go 75. 4K, I'd probably do 100 to even 150. So it really depends on what resolution you're going to be playing, but I would just scale this linearly and you'll be fine. 50 megabytes per second is great for 1080p videos. And then that's all for the Nvidia app. You're going to want to make sure that your shortcut is set up to save the clip once you've done that. And then this is going to save to wherever your gallery is set up to be. But this is going to be the most performant option for taking clips. And so I always recommend to use the Nvidia overlay or the AMD instant replay. It's just going to be better for latency and FPS in general. And then that's it. That leaves us done with OBS, Streamlabs, and Nvidia. Again, OBS and Streamlabs were roughly the same. The UI is slightly different, but most of the information you're going to need for Streamlabs is going to be in the OBS section of the video. That part of the video is way more in depth as well. So you guys should be set. And please let us know in the comments whether or not this was helpful for you, what software you're using. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments, or even feel free to join our Discord in the description and ask the question in the PC help chat. You can even @ me, Talantro. I am the stream expert. I do the stream services that I showed you on the website, and so you should be set. And let me know if you have any questions or any issues. Thanks for watching.